David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm pleased to make a few comments on this, what could have been a very good bill, and a bill that actually the Green Party supported to Select Committee at first reading, because we saw some good things in it. But unfortunately, there are two deal breakers in this bill for us, and I think we share the concerns of the Labor Party. I was interested to hear just now from the Minister. He seems to be conflating opposition to this bill with opposition to private provision of education, science and much else. And that's clearly nonsense. I mean, yes, most certainly we support the public tertiary sector. We also see a very legitimate place for PTEs, private tertiary educational institutes. Of course, we're an institute, an organisation with a splendid history and hopefully an equally splendid future. What we push back against is unnecessary privatisation of services that are better located within the public sector, where you get an unreasonable level, an unfair level of competition, as we are seeing the push to contract out the provision of education, as we have seen at Unitec and we are now seeing in action at Lincoln. But to return more specifically to this piece of legislation, which, as I say, we would have been happy to support, but for these two issues that have been identified. One of them being the removal of the skills leadership function. And it is interesting to note that the submitters, the 30-odd submissions to this legislation, were for the most part supportive, but almost universally opposed to the notion that skills leadership should be left to who knows who. There seems to be a pious hope embedded in this legislation that somebody somewhere will pick up the ball, and indeed in some industries that may be the case. But the Building Construction ITO was very strong on the issue, that they made the very valid point that within their industry, within building and construction, something like 90% of apprentices are trained by companies with fewer than 20 employees, and in many cases fewer than 10. And it's simply disingenuous to think that companies, businesses of that size, of that scale, are somehow going to collaborate to provide skills leadership in any sort of meaningful way. It's actually going to make the task of the government, indeed, and all of those who collectively want to direct and ensure that we have a good sense of what skills are required in the future, what are the best training programs and mechanisms to put in place. It'll make the task of those various groups much more difficult not to have that reliable feedback. Initially, as I say, when we first saw the bill, we thought, oh, that's interesting. They want to take skills leadership away from the ITOs, and we thought it'll be interesting to see what agency, what mechanism, by what means is the government seeking to improve leadership. And sadly disappointed we were when we discovered, in fact, no, it's just left to somebody out there. Hopefully there's this, as I say, this pious hope that somebody, some organisation will both be willing and critically that will be able to provide leadership within the specific, whichever industry it may be at the moment. So the other issue, of course, is the matter of funding, public funding being directed to single companies, to single organisations. And the point's been made that even Business New Zealand, who are typically quite pro-business and quite pro the private sector, gave very, very qualified support, qualified to the extent that they asked the very sensible question, well, if not the ITOs, then who? And that question clearly has not been answered in this legislation, nor has it been answered, I would hazard to suggest, by the Minister's last contribution. So there is an SOP in my name which would seek to remedy the two issues that the Greens have with this legislation, and which I believe our Labor colleagues share, which would seek to reinsert the provisions that assign skills leadership responsibility to the ITOs where it ought to rest, and that would delete the section that allows public funding to go to private entities. Even with the best will in the world, a private organisation, a company producing whatever goods or service would inevitably tailor the training, the education they provided to the needs of their specific activity. It's the nature of business. It's human nature, indeed, to be a little bit self-interested. And it's difficult to imagine a situation where a private provider of that sort could actually be relied upon to deliver the breadth and depth of skills, of awareness, of information, ability and so on that is really required of people coming into the trades. Thank you.
Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by just responding to one or two of the comments that Nick Smith made in his earlier contribution about completion rates, because that's something that I